There is a war in the Bible that has never happened, a coalition of nations, a mass attack on Israel, a confrontation of global proportions, and a direct intervention of God. This war is described in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and for decades, scholars, theologians, and religious leaders have asked, are we seeing it form before our eyes? The text tells of a leader named Gog from the land of Magog. It speaks of peoples from the north. He speaks of Persia. He speaks of strategic alliances. It speaks of a coordinated invasion. And if you look at the current scenario in the Middle East, you will see alliances approaching. You will see rising tensions. It will see geopolitical reconfiguration happening in real time. But we need to be careful. Not every crisis is immediate fulfillment. Not every alliance is the final sign. Not all conflict is Gog and Magog. However, completely ignoring Ezekiel 38 is also unwise, because the text describes something very specific. Israel dwells in safety. A coalition coming from the far north, a sudden invasion, and God intervenes with earthquake, fire, and judgment. This has never happened this way in history. There has never been a war exactly as Ezekiel describes. So the question remains, are we facing a future prophecy, or has it already been symbolically fulfilled? Some say this points to events from the past. Others hold that it is a future war before the tribulation. Still others claim that it connects with Revelation 20 after the millennium. There is serious debate, and that's why we need to do what we always do here. Back to text. Analyze the historical context, examine the nations mentioned, compare with the current scenario, and maintain balance, because the focus of Ezekiel 38 is not just war, it is a revelation. At the end of the chapter, God declares, "Thus shall I magnify myself and sanctify myself and make myself known in the eyes of many nations." Ezekiel 38:23. The ultimate goal is not destruction. It is a demonstration, and before trying to fit every current news story into the prophecy, we need to answer the basic question, who are Gog and Magog? That's what we're going to explore now. Before connecting Ezekiel 38 with any modern setting, we need to understand the basics. Who is Gog? And what is Magog? The first time the name Magog appears in the Bible is in Genesis 10. Magog is listed as a descendant of Japheth, son of Noah. This brings us to the so-called Table of Nations, where ancient peoples are organized according to their post-flood lineages. Historically, many scholars associate Magog with peoples north of Israel. Some identify it with regions near the Caucasus. Some, in more modern interpretations, suggest a connection with territories that today would be in the region of Russia. But here we need to be responsible. The Bible does not mention Russia. She mentions Magog. The text needs to be respected. In Ezekiel 38:2 we read, "Son of man, set your face against Gog from the land of Magog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal." Here three important names emerge. Rosmosk Tubal. Over the centuries, interpreters have tried to correlate these names with modern territories. Some associate Meshech with regions close to present-day Turkey. Tubal is also often linked to Asia Minor. But there is debate. Not everyone agrees that Roz is a direct reference to modern Russia. Some understand Roz to mean simply chief or principal. In other words, the text is not as simple as headlines suggest. Now, what do we know for sure? We know that Gog is described as a leader. He commands a coalition. It brings nations together. He plans a strategic invasion. Ezekiel 38:4 shows God saying that he will put hooks in their jaws, language that indicates that God is sovereignly allowing this movement to happen. This already teaches us something profound. Even this war is under divine control. Gog does not act outside of God's permission. Now, another important detail, the text says that he comes from the northern extremities. For Israel, far north historically pointed to regions above Syria. This fuels interpretations that connect Magog to northern territories. But we need to be honest. The exact identification is debated. We cannot say with 100% certainty that Magog is a specific modern nation. We can say that it involves peoples to the north of Israel. We can say that it involves a coalition. We can say that it involves coordinated military strategy. But going beyond that requires caution. Now comes the most important point. Regardless of the exact geography, the focus of Ezekiel 38 is not only on the invader, it is the moment of invasion. The text describes Israel as dwelling securely. This raises chronological questions. When will Israel be experiencing this sense of security? Before the tribulation, during a peace agreement, after any international treaty? These questions are more important than trying to fit modern names right away, because the text gives us clear elements. International coalition, coordinated attack, Israel seemingly confident, God's supernatural intervention. None of this has yet happened exactly as described, and that keeps the prophecy open. Now that we understand who Gog and Magog are in biblical and historical terms, we need to look at the allies that appear in the text, because the list of nations in Ezekiel 38 is astonishing, and some of them are very familiar in the current scenario. If this study is opening your vision on how to interpret prophecy with balance and responsibility, subscribe to the channel now. Activate the bell on the right to follow the next arms of this series, and share this video with someone who needs to study biblically based eschatology, not with alarmist headlines. And he comments here, "I want discernment, not sensationalism." Now that we understand who Gog is and the land of Magog within the biblical context, we need to look at something even more impressive. The list of nations marching with him, Ezekiel 38, 5-6, explicitly mentions Persia, Kux, Put, Gomer, Togarmah. This is not vague language, they are historic names. Let's analyze it with balance. Persia. There is no debate here. Persia is the ancient name of present-day Iran. This is a historical fact. And Iran is now one of the nations most openly hostile to Israel on the geopolitical stage. This automatically draws attention, but be careful. Political hostility is not automatically prophetic fulfillment. It is a relevant fact, not a final conclusion. Cush, traditionally associated with the region of Ethiopia or parts of northeastern Africa. Cum, often linked to the North African region, possibly Libya. Gomer, associated by many scholars with peoples of Anatolia or areas of present-day Turkey. Togarmah, also related to regions near the Caucasus or Asia Minor. Now notice something intriguing. If we put these possible locations on the modern map, we have a coalition that involves regions to the north of Israel, regions to the east, regions to the south, a geographical convergence around Israel. This is impressive, but we need to maintain maturity. Ezekiel does not mention modern names. He mentions ancient peoples. Modern geographical identification is a historical reconstruction, plausible, but still interpretive. Now let's get to the strategic point. The text describes a coordinated military alliance. Ezekiel 38:9 says that they will rise like a storm and cover the earth like a cloud. This indicates magnitude. It is not a small conflict. It is a massive offensive. Other important information, Ezekiel 38:11 describes Israel as a land of villages without walls. This suggests a sense of security. The text speaks of a people who live confidently. This raises important chronological questions. Israel today lives under constant tension. Advanced defense systems, monitored borders, high surveillance. Does this match safe dwelling? Some argue that this security may come after a future peace agreement, and that connects with Daniel 9 and the idea of a covenant. But this is still interpretation. Now think strategically. Never in ancient history has there been an invasion that exactly fulfilled all the details of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Description includes massive earthquake, confusion among the invaders, supernatural intervention, fire falling on the nations. 7 months burying the dead. It has never literally happened this way. This keeps prophecy open. Now notice something profound. The ultimate goal of the invasion is not simply war. Ezekiel 38:16 states that God will allow this to happen so that the nations may know me. The focus is divine revelation, not geopolitics. This changes the perspective. Ezekiel 38 isn't just about modern covenants. It's about God showing his sovereignty before the nations. Now the inevitable question arises, when does this happen? Before the tribulation? During? After the millennium? How does Revelation 20 mention Gog and Magog again? This is the most debated part. And that's exactly what we're going to analyze now, because the time of war is as important as the identity of nations. Here's where it all gets even deeper, because identifying Gog and Magog is important. But defining the timing of this war is even more decisive, and this is where many go wrong. There are basically 3 major interpretations within Christian eschatology: before the Great Tribulation, during the tribulation, after the millennium, as described in Revelation 20. Let's analyze it with biblical responsibility. Before the tribulation, some scholars understand that Ezekiel 38 and 39 take place before the full manifestation of the Antichrist. Why? Because the text describes Israel as dwelling securely. Ezekiel 38:11 speaks of a quiet people living without walls, doors, or bars. This could indicate a period of false peace, perhaps an international agreement, perhaps a political pact. And this connects with Daniel 9:27, which mentions a covenant made for a week. If this is the case, Gog's war could take place at the very beginning of this period, serving as an event that sets the stage for the rise of the Antichrist as the solver of the global crisis. But it is still a hypothesis. During the tribulation, others argue that the magnitude described, earthquakes, fire from heaven, direct divine judgment, fits better in the context of the judgments described in Revelation. Ezekiel 38:19 speaks of a great earthquake. Revelation also describes massive earthquakes. Ezekiel 39 speaks of fire falling on the nations. Revelation describes similar judgments. This connection suggests that war may occur as early as the period of global judgment. But there is a detail. Ezekiel 39 mentions that it will take Israel 7 months to bury the dead. This requires time, stability, and logistics. Some argue that this would be difficult during the extreme chaos of the second half of the tribulation. After the millennium, Revelation 20:7-8 mentions Gog and Magog again, but there the context is different. After the 1,000 years, Satan is released and gathers nations called Gog and Magog for the final battle against the saints. The description is different. In Revelation, fire descends and consumes immediately. There are no 7 months burying the dead. There is no detailed description of the geographical coalition. That is why many scholars understand that Revelation 20 uses Gog and Magog symbolically as a representation of the spirit of final rebellion, while Ezekiel 38 seems to describe a specific historical event. Now notice something crucial. Regardless of the interpretive line, Ezekiel makes it clear that this war is part of God's sovereign plan. Ezekiel 38:23 states, "Thus shall I magnify my name, sanctify myself, and make myself known in the eyes of many nations." The ultimate goal is not geopolitical, it is theological. It is a revelation. It is God showing that He governs history. Now think, today we see alliances being formed in the Middle East. We see constant tensions. We see inflammatory speeches. But none of these moves, by themselves, prove that Ezekiel 38 is now being fulfilled. We need balance. The text speaks of a very specific scenario, and it hasn't happened exactly as described yet. Does that mean we're close? Maybe. But the Bible calls us to vigilance, not panic, and that brings us to the most important endpoint. What should be our attitude towards this prophecy? If there's one non-negotiable thing about Ezekiel 38, it's this: the focus is not Gog, the focus is on Israel. Observe the text carefully. All the movement of nations revolves around a specific target. You shall come up against my people Israel, Ezekiel 38:16. It is not against an ideology. It is not against any culture. It is against the people who carry the promise. And this is not new. Since Genesis 12, God declared to Abraham, "In thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed." Israel has never been just a geographical nation. Israel is a prophetic marker. Now think, how many wars has the world seen? Empires have come and gone, but Israel continues to exist, scattered, persecuted, exiled, but never erased. Ezekiel 36 and 37 speak of the return to the earth. Chapter 37 describes the Valley of Dry Bones, a vision of national restoration. On May 14, 1948, Israel came back into existence as a modern nation. This historical fact is not a theological invention, it is a real geopolitical milestone. But here we need balance again. Does the return of Israel in 1948 fulfill aspects of national restoration? Yes. Does this mean that all the prophecies are already in final execution? Not necessarily. Now notice something profound in Ezekiel 38. The text says that Israel will be dwelling securely. This suggests a moment of false stability, perhaps a treaty, perhaps a political alliance, perhaps a period of apparent peace, and this connects with Daniel 9:27, which mentions a covenant made by a future leader. Israel is always in the center of the chessboard. And why? Because the messianic promise is linked to Israel. Because God's final revelation surrounds Jerusalem. Because Revelation points to events that culminate there. This explains why Jerusalem is one of the most disputed cities on the planet. It's not just politics, it is spiritual. But here comes the most important point. We cannot turn every conflict in the Middle East into an automatic fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. We need to separate constant political tension, specific prophetic fulfillment. Ezekiel 38 describes something unique, a coordinated attack, a direct supernatural intervention, a global recognition of God's sovereignty. This has not yet happened exactly like this, but the fact that Israel is back in the land, it already keeps the prophetic clock moving. And that brings us to the last point. Now, yes, spiritual application. After studying Gog, Magog, the nations, and Israel, a simple question remains. What does this change in my life now? And the answer is also simple. Prophecy was not written to turn us into political analysts. It was written to make us watchful. Ezekiel 38 shows something very clear. God remains sovereign, nations move, leaders stand up, coalitions form. But in the end, it is God who drives the story. This brings two practical lessons. First, we don't live in a world out of control. Even when the scene seems unstable, God has not lost dominion. Second, we need to be spiritually prepared, because regardless of when this war happens, Christ's return is certain. Jesus said in Matthew 24:42, "Watch, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming." The focus was never on finding out the date. The focus has always been to be ready. If Ezekiel 38 points to something future, this should not generate fear. It must generate alignment, more prayer, more holiness, more commitment to the Word. Because in the end, the biggest question is not when Gog will come. It's whether you'll be standing firm when Christ returns. And here's the final call. If this study has brought clarity and balance to you, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell on the right to follow the next arms of this series, and share this video with someone who needs to study prophecy responsibly. And he comments here, "I choose vigilance with discernment."